stress comes into play because so many people are truly overwhelmed when their marriage is at this point of ending. A lot of stress that's brought on by all of the uncertainty. How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? And as a coach, part of my job is to listen to what's really on your mind. And as we do a lot of that, the stress level starts to come down and people come back into themselves. And so that's like a really important step in this whole process to empowering people to make good decisions in the divorce journey.
Welcome to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast. I'm your host, attorney and mediator, Cary Jacobson. Each week, we bring you practical guidance, real conversations, and expert insights to help you navigate divorce with clarity, confidence, and less conflict. If you're ready for a calmer, more empowered path forward, you're in the right place. Welcome back. I'm your host, Cary Jacobson, divorce attorney, mediator, and advocate for out-of-court resolutions. Today, we're talking about a resource that not everyone knows about, but can make a huge difference: divorce coaching. My guest today is James Traub, a certified divorce coach who helps individuals navigate divorce with clarity and purpose, drawing not only on his own professional training, but also on his lived experience as a child of divorce. James helps his clients move toward their best possible divorce, one that preserves family relationships and sets them up for positive long-term outcomes. Through a mix of practical decision-making frameworks and emotional management strategies, James ensures that choices his clients make align with the future that they truly want to build. He's the founder of bestpossibledivorce.com, a resource for individuals looking for support, tools, and guidance through divorce. James, welcome.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Cary.
I always like to start at the beginning of our guest story. What really led you to working with people who are going through divorce?
Right, because no one grows up thinking that they're going to be a divorce coach when they're all... My background's in chemistry. I spent 15 years doing quality assurance and quality control work. So this has been a huge departure from where I initially came from. And I went through my own transition about 5 years ago and got really passionate about helping men in relationships, helping them around issues of intimacy and emotional intelligence and deeper connection with their partners. And it was really challenging to connect with men, even though there was such a need for that type of work. There was not a whole lot of hunger for that. And as I started to get more involved in men's groups and men's retreats, I noticed that one of the biggest events that was bringing men to these events was a really bad breakup or a divorce. And I very naively came back and Googled after one of those retreats, Charlotte, North Carolina, men divorce coaching, just wanting to know if anyone was focused on helping men to kind of put themselves back together. And in that Google search, I discovered that you could become certified as a divorce coach. And I also discovered collaborative divorce. And so I started moving in the direction of learning a lot more about both of those things. And that has ultimately led me to working now primarily with men who are either contemplating or experiencing divorce to navigate the road that lies ahead of them. And it's been really interesting because with a background in quality assurance, my job was always, how do you build a process that delivers a consistently good outcome? Right. And as I went through my certification in divorce coaching and heard the stories of so many people that had been through divorces, it seemed like this was a process that was delivering consistently poor outcomes for many of the people involved. And so I got really, really curious around what is it that makes divorce so consistently terrible for people. And I don't hold any sort of hope that I can turn this into a beautiful experience, but I definitely saw some opportunities to make it suck less. And so I've brought a lot of that into my work now as a divorce coach to say, like, what is the best possible divorce that we can achieve here?
That's wonderful. We've had lots of guests who are divorce coaches, but I will say that there are not very many that focus on the needs of men. I've worked with, lots of coaches, but so many of them are geared towards women for a variety of reasons, most of them being that they are women coaches who have also gone through divorce. So they have something to kind of share as a personal story. So it's very nice to see men also, having resources out there, because I do think that it is something that's lacking.
Yeah, certainly.
So many people do not even know what a divorce coach is. So can you start with that explanation for our listeners, kind of explain what you do as a coach?
Absolutely. And I like to start by saying that different divorce coaches are going to have a different focus, right? So whether we're talking pre-divorce, during divorce, post-divorce, some divorce coaches will focus on different steps kind of in that whole process. My interest is very much on the early stages when divorce is first coming up as a possibility for a relationship or when that process is just getting started. And I'll oftentimes also say that, divorce is really like a 4-dimensional process. And 2 dimensions that get a lot of talk are the legal and the financial dimensions of divorce.
Right.
Those are journeys that have to be walked. You have to disentangle legally and you have to disentangle financially. But 2 other dimensions don't get as much talk and they don't get as much support. And this is really where coaching fits in, which is the emotional and the relational dimensions of divorce. And so as a divorce coach, I'm really here to support people to work through a lot of the emotional components and how they show up in decision making, how they might show up in negotiations and trying to hammer out a separation agreement. And then the relational component has a lot to do with how do I continue to interact with this person, given that we're now going through a period of high conflict, right? Basically ending this relationship and this marriage and potentially still living in the same house with this individual. And I find that a lot of the high conflict divorce situations are situations where people have progressed into talking finances and talking about the legal components and maybe custody before adequately resolving and working through some of the emotional and the relational components.
I 100% agree and understand that while the financial and legal components are necessary, the emotional side often drives how those negotiations are going to go. And really having a coach to work on the emotional side can improve and positively impact the financial and legal decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah. I see 3 phases that need to be worked through and is really the focus of much of the work that I do with clients. It kind of leads up to that point of beginning the business of divorce, right? Sitting down to really figure out what the terms of the separation agreement are. And those 3 steps are dealing with stress, dealing with spouse, and dealing with story. Stress comes into play because so many people are truly overwhelmed when their marriage is at this point of ending or when it has suddenly ended if a bombshell has been dropped. And there's a certain amount of that stress that can be resolved in talking with a therapist or talking with good friends and family. There's also a lot of stress that's brought on by all of the uncertainty. How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? What is this going to do to my retirement? What happens if she says she's going to take the kids and move back to be closer to her parents? All of these unanswered questions really start to bear down on people when they're thinking about them for days, weeks, and sometimes even months. And so in that first phase, it's really about how can we bring the stress level down? And as a coach, part of my job is to listen to what's really on your mind and help you to identify what the questions truly are that don't have answers. And then to start to group those. Are these legal questions? Are they financial questions? Are they co-parenting questions? Is it questions about the house and the mortgage? And then helping to connect individuals to resources, other professionals who can start to give them some guidance and answer some of these questions or at least set expectations. And as we do a lot of that, the stress level starts to come down and people come back into themselves. They can think more linearly, more logically, more strategically. They can have more of a future focus. And so that's like a really important step in this whole process to empowering people to make good decisions in the divorce journey. If they continue to be overwhelmed through the whole thing, decisions are made out of a place of fear and reactivity and ultimately are not going to be the best long-term decisions.
Right. I was just going to say, as you mentioned, that part of that stress is coming from the unknown. And so as they get more educated about the different pieces and steps, some of that can be alleviated.
Absolutely. And certainly not all of it, but I find that's a really big chunk, especially when people are very new to this and maybe they haven't had any professional consultations. They've just got a backpack full of unanswered questions.
The unanswered questions, but also all of the negative feedback they're getting from other family members, friends, colleagues about how terrible their own experience was. Because, once you're going through it, you hear from everyone else who had a terrible experience. And so that even heightens the stress level even more.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it can create a lot more fear too when you hear about what went sideways for other people. you might start to reflect and say, well, is that going to happen to me? Do I need to protect myself to avoid something like that happens? And it's just more and more to think about. The second area where there's a lot of stress is the ongoing interactions with a spouse. And I oftentimes say that if you want to have an amicable divorce, it's going to expect more of you in some ways than a high conflict divorce, because you can't just wash your hands of talking to this person and walk away and say, look, talk to my attorney. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Now you truly have to stay in communication, productive communication with this individual. You can't withdraw so much that communication breaks down, but if you come in too close and you're getting triggered in all of these conversations, or if you haven't created some boundaries about when we will and won't talk about how we got to this point and what I didn't do, what you did, that can create a tremendous amount of stress, especially if two people are in the same household. And so that kind of second step in the process is helping people to think, like, where do I get so triggered in talking to this individual? Is it how they're talking to me? Is it when we're trying to have conversations? Is it particular topics that we're getting into? And then what do I do with that, right? How can I start to respond to these situations differently to, again, bring that stress level down? Because everything improves as that stress level comes down.
Absolutely. And once that stress level comes down, then people can start having those more substantive conversations about the negotiation of the finances and the custody and all of those things that are necessary to finalize the divorce process itself.
Absolutely. And the third step you alluded to earlier is what I call story. And this is really stepping back and saying, is one person feeling like the victim in this divorce? Because when there's like a perpetrator-victim dynamic going on, the person who's feeling really hurt and feeling really angry tends to be looking backwards into this relationship of, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe you did this to me. And in that mindset, a lot of that's going to come out in the negotiations where I'm looking back at the hurt and now I'm kind of wanting to seek some justice or make up for that in the way that I'm going to be negotiating with you. And so that's a delicate step to try and reduce some of this victim identification and to get onto the table how both individuals have had some responsibility in the relationship getting to this point so that they can both ultimately be more forward focused in the legal and the financial conversations about what do we both need to exit this chapter of our life and have the best chance at having a successful next chapter in our life, rather than looking backwards saying, how do I get back at you for all of these things that have happened? And I find that if people can deal with the stress, they can figure out how to continue to interact with their spouse well, and they can work to reduce any sort of identification of someone being victimized by this. Now, when you move into hiring other professionals and having these conversations, everything's so much more smooth.
Agree. They're in a place where they have managed some of those emotional triggers and now can move into the more rational decision making at that stage.
Right. Yeah. And it becomes, now an opportunity to say, okay, well, what support do we truly need to have these conversations now? So then you get into, do you need an attorney? And if so, what type of attorney? And so there's some education around that. We can talk about co-parenting specialists that might help you to think through your parenting plan, whether you're going to do nesting, the different decisions that people are making as it relates to their kids. And obviously working with a CDFA to get some transparency around the finances, to understand what both people truly need coming out on the other side. All of that now becomes welcomed support to help navigate the conversation to be had.
Yeah. And is that what you kind of refer to is that team-based support?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because as a divorce coach, I'm not able to do any of the business of divorce. It's not my charge. So ultimately, when people are ready, they do need the right professional support to sit down and to hammer out the actual details of that agreement and to get that formalized so that they can move forward. And helping them to know what the resources are is a really big, step in the process, because many people don't know about CDFAs. They don't know about co-parenting specialists, and they certainly don't know the different types of attorneys. So, helping them to see that they have some options empowers them to bring in the right type of support that feels good for what they're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. And for any of our listeners who may not have listened to other episodes where we've had several CDFAs, just for you guys to know, a CDFA is a certified divorce financial analyst, which often is part of the divorce team that is helping folks analyze the division of assets, financial support, and that sort of thing. So they are a vital asset to the divorce team when you're looking.
Absolutely. In talking about men, there's a lot of guys that are good with spreadsheets. And I find a lot of guys, in an interest of saving money, will sit down, they'll put all of the finances into a spreadsheet, and then they'll present that to their spouse. And they may be coming from a good place of wanting to help or wanting to be expedient. But if they've been controlling, if they've been financially abusive, or if they've done other things that would undermine a sense of trust in the relationship, oftentimes I have to remind them that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there's definitely a room for third-party neutrals to come in and to provide structure for these types of conversations, because it's not just about the clarity that he's trying to seek or the offers that he's wanting to make. It's very much about what your spouse needs to continue to feel safe in these conversations and to feel good about the agreements that are made, make sure they feel fully educated and informed on what their rights are. And almost every time I'm recommending a CDFA to just provide some clarity on the finances. And I like to say that if people don't know how much they're going to leave with, they're always going to want more. So getting someone else to present something in a very structured and detailed manner is so important for moving forward.
And the other thing for individuals to know, especially if you're working with the male and he was traditionally, and this is not the same in every household, but in many, he was the CFO of the household, right? And so he may already know all of the numbers and understand all of that. But if his spouse doesn't, that is the opportunity for them to become educated. And having that CDFA can be a great opportunity for them to get educated and feel more confident about the numbers so that they can make informed decisions in the agreement.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes, part of my work as a coach is helping a guy to see the value in his spouse feeling safe to continue having these conversations. They may not want to spend another couple $1,000s on another professional, especially if he feels like it's work that he can do. The true value may not be in the financial modeling. It may be in providing some reassurance to his spouse, to the other individual in these conversations, so that again, they feel safe, they feel good, they feel informed, and a decision can be made.
What advice would you give someone who isn't sure what professionals they actually need as part of their support team?
It sounds self-serving, but I think many people would benefit from having a first touch point with a divorce coach just to get a little bit more informed on what their options are. Yep. Because I think for a lot of people, divorce equals attorney. And because there are so many unanswered questions, there's a strong desire and a hunger for answers. And it seems obvious to go to an attorney to seek answers as it relates to divorce. And there are many great attorneys out there who can provide some input and some good education. It tends to be really expensive to do it that way. You may end up hiring an attorney who ultimately isn't aligned with the way that you want this divorce to go. And so a divorce coach can help you to see who else you might talk to get some of the answers that you're really hungering for in a way that's more affordable and potentially a little bit more accurate. So if most of the questions are financial, speaking with a CDFA may be more advantageous. If a lot of the kids are around, how are we going to make this nesting situation work? Then talking to a co-parenting specialist might make more sense.
As an attorney, I can, speak to the fact that not all attorneys talk to clients about the different divorce process options. So many of them are only litigation, and they don't explain to clients that they have alternative options. And so that's the only information they're getting, right? I'm supposed to go to an attorney. We're supposed to file for divorce right away. And that's the way that the process is. And they don't get from either a coach, another attorney, that there are other alternatives that could save them thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars, and months, if not years, of a court battle. So I highly recommend. Yeah.
Yeah. And when it comes to having an amicable divorce, so much of it is about both people feeling comfortable and safe having these conversations with the least amount of intrusive support. And I can't tell you how many people have retained a litigation attorney and then tell me that they want to have an amicable divorce. And we have to just pause and explore. This person may have provided you some great information initially when you had a lot of questions, but what signal does it send to your spouse when they go to this attorney's website and see who you've hired, is that giving them the type of assurance and safety that they truly need to engage with you in the way that you're wanting to engage with them? And people don't oftentimes do this on purpose. It's a mistake that they're making just because they may not know what all of their options are, or they're so in their own world of needing to feel some safety that they're just not really thinking about how it's going to present to the other person.
Right. Or that person was recommended by everyone in your Facebook group, right? And so that's the person you've chosen, even though you don't necessarily understand the way that they're going to handle your case.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, talking to people about mediation options, or even letting them know that there's some traditional attorneys who have a very strong commitment to not ending up in court, even separate from collaborative attorneys, really starts to show them that they've got a lot of different options. And I find that when most people see their options, rarely are they wanting to go down the litigation route unless that's been the condition, in their marriage. And oftentimes they're not the ones that are going to work with me as a divorce coach.
Understand.
Yeah.
No, obviously divorce brings up, as we mentioned before, conflict and some, difficult conversations. How do you help your clients prepare and navigate those conversations?
This comes up a lot because it's not unusual to have clients who are saying, like, I'm at the point of divorce. I'm ready to do this. And I'll ask them, have you seriously even talked about divorce? Has the D word come up between you and your spouse? Well, no, it hasn't yet. And so we have to kind of call a timeout and figure out how to take a couple steps back because one person's moving a little bit too quickly here. Again, I'm a huge fan of bringing in other professionals to help provide some structure for the difficult decision for someone to do it on their own. So I'll oftentimes talk about discernment counseling, which is something that many people are unaware of. And that can be a great forum to have a safe process and a safe space to say some of the things that might be very difficult for you to say at home. I also find that many people in the relationship may have experienced that when they try to bring something up, they get interrupted or the conversation goes sideways and then they feel frustrated, like they couldn't communicate everything that they wanted to communicate. So we might talk about how you approach a conversation. Would it make more sense to write this one down, to give it as a letter, to potentially to read the letter, as opposed to trying to hold it all in your head and having some additional stress of trying to remember all of that? Is there a particular time of day, right, to have these conversations? Or have you asked your partner for some specific time to talk about something that's really important? Many times people are swirling so much at this point that they haven't really thought about all the different ways that they could have these conversations. So those are some of the things that I can offer in addition to even role playing, right? And getting a sense of how they might approach this conversation and giving some coaching there about what's truly important to communicate now versus everything that they might feel like they need to communicate in that moment.
Absolutely. You mentioned discernment counseling, and that is something that I often recommend as well if people are at that very early stage of not really knowing whether or not that's how they're going to move forward, or as you mentioned, kind of needing that safe space to communicate that they are ready to, terminate the marriage. And so for any of our listeners who may not be familiar with discernment counseling, it's not your traditional marriage therapy. It's more of a short-term, kind of regimented, as I've been explained by therapists, kind of a regimented therapeutic setting where you may have one spouse that's kind of leaning towards ending the marriage and another spouse that is not necessarily. And it allows them to really make decisions. Are they going to stay together and work on the marriage and maybe move forward to traditional marriage therapy? Are they going to terminate the marriage and end in divorce? Or are they going to kind of keep things status quo? And so I don't know if you have anything to add as far as your understanding of discernment.
Yeah. I like to tell people, because oftentimes there's an aversion to going back into the therapist's office. They feel like they've kind of been there, done that. That didn't really help. And so I like to tell them that discernment counseling is not about fixing any problems. It's only about clarity. Right. Yeah. And it's got a maximum of 5 sessions, but most people get what they need by session 2 or 3. And you kind of mentioned the 3 potential outcomes. The first 2 parts of the process are, can we just get clear on what the problem is in this marriage? And then the second part is, can we both take some responsibility for our role and our contribution in that problem? And I tell people that this is kind of the last stop on the train. You either say it now or you kind of say it never. And so it might give them permission to be a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more transparent about their pain, about what they're wanting, about what they're needing. And I tell them that, like, regardless of the outcome out of discernment, it can be really helpful to see how their partner responds to what it is that they're sharing. If I'm trying one more time to communicate what's really not working for me in this relationship, and it gets thrown back in my face, or my partner just doesn't get it, that might actually advance my emotional readiness towards a decision to divorce. Because, like, now I've done all that I can reasonably expect that I could do to at least get to the point of some mutual understanding, let alone trying to solve and improve and fix and remedy the problem. And so all of that's done with a trained couples counselor who's got these skills to handle the conversation, make sure that both people get heard. And it can be really helpful for people to just go through that process before advancing into formal divorce, because then there's no surprises.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I find as a mediator, those folks who have taken that exercise, really come out of that having done the emotional work and now being ready to move forward with the negotiation side of things. And so I think it's a wonderful tool for folks to see, because like you said, they've made that last effort to see if it's going to be possible to work together or not.
Yeah. And kind of putting arms around all these different professionals that we're talking about. This is where I think a divorce coach, again, delivers a lot of value. When your world's kind of crumbling and everything feels hard, it's asking a lot of individuals to go online, to search, to research, and to try to understand who all these professionals are, how they might work with them, when in the process they might work with them. Someone like a divorce coach is walking this journey with you, listening to what's really impacting you with an understanding of, like, what comes next, and can say, like, now might be a good time for you to reach out and to talk to this type of an individual to get some support for either figuring out what your options are or actually coming to some sort of an agreement with your spouse. And so we can kind of bring the right resources in at the right time for the right reason, and then even coach you on how to be efficient with those professionals so you're not overspending, and continue to move through this process well.
What do you see as some of the biggest long-term benefits of working with a coach?
Well, especially with men, and I'm not saying that this is true only for men, but we have a lot of conversations early on around, what do you want to see 10 years from now when you look back on this moment and how you showed up in this situation? Because especially if there's been an affair and he's feeling really angry, he may want to make his spouse pay and allow that anger to kind of intrude on the whole divorce process. But when I challenge them to say, like, you don't get to be a jerk now and be a nice guy later. Like, if you truly see yourself as a good guy who's above board, like, this is your opportunity to become your best self. And so what is that going to look like? And also, when you have a conversation with your kids, 5 or 10 years from now, and they want to know, Dad, did you really give this a fair shot? Or how did you treat Mom? Like, how do you want to be in that moment in terms of communicating to your children? Do you want to look back with a lot of regret over how you let emotions kind of run the show? Or do you want to step into that higher self now? I think some of the best long-term benefits are walking through this process with integrity and really challenging oneself to be focused on what you need for the next chapter, but also to empathize and to really think about what the kids need and what your spouse needs so that everyone can exit this process to the best degree possible. And that really pays a lifetime of benefit, not only for the individual, but I think it's really important for the kids too, to see that the parents really kept everyone's needs in focus to whatever extent, they can reasonably do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If someone is listening and is just starting this divorce journey, what's the first step that they can take today to bring more clarity and calm to the process?
My mind goes to, what are your biggest fears? Maybe pulling out a clean sheet of paper and just starting with, what am I most scared about? Because if those biggest fears aren't handled in some way, if they're not addressed in some way, and you continue to hold those as you go through this process, your decision making is going to be from a fear-based place, all about, how do I feel safe? And for many people, feeling safe is hiring an attorney that can fight for me. I think figuring out what those biggest fears are and then challenging yourself to say, well, what can I do about these before we get down this road? Is there someone that I can talk to start to work on these? Would probably be where I would encourage them to start.
Well, James, thank you so much for joining us today and shining a light on the role of divorce coaching, especially for men. You've shown that divorce doesn't have to be purely destructive. It can be a thoughtful process where people make intentional decisions about their future and preserve what matters most. For those of you who are listening, you can learn more about James and his work at bestpossibledivorce.com. Is there anywhere else people can find you, James?
They can find me primarily on LinkedIn and then YouTube. If you search for James Traub, you'll find my channel with some educational videos that I'm starting to put out there as well.
Awesome. That's wonderful. And for those who are listening, be sure to check out our website if you're interested in flat fee mediation, legal tools, or other guidance and support for your divorce journey at jacobsonfamilylaw.com. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm your host, Cary Jacobson. Until next time, remember, you don't have to go through this alone. Thanks for listening to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast. If you found today's episode helpful, be sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. For more resources or to work with us, visit jacobsonfamilylaw.com. Until next time, stay grounded, stay informed, and stay drama-free.